I'm Alan Cogan. Join me as I highlight small businesses with interviews on site at distilleries, breweries, and more. My mission is to share the stories of the awesome people behind the craft. Welcome to Crafted Conversations. Jordan here at Cotton Reed in DC.
Welcome.
Tell me about yourself. How'd you get into the distilling business?
Great question. Let's see. It started off as an illicit hobby, probably like many of your podcast guests. And I had been living in DC, working in the space and satellite industry as a consultant, and love space, love all that stuff. My old clients, super interesting organizations like NASA and, private space companies and whatnot as well. But at the end of the day, that job was making PowerPoints. So I was really, along with my co-founder, Reed. So that's, we named the company after ourselves. Took us 2 years to pick the name, actually. My last name, Cotton, his first name, Reed. But we were home distilling and visiting a bunch of the distilleries in the region. And let's see, I think the first one we went to together actually was Cotton Creek in their original facility before the one that they moved into, I don't know how many years ago now.
Yeah.
But you'd hear their story of how they got started at all these small distilleries, and it was usually, hey, we were lawyers, we were engineers, we were whatever, and we decided to give this crazy new career a go. And you hear that enough times and you start to think, maybe that's the thing people do. Maybe we could be those people that do that thing. So, we start to kind of take the hobby more and more seriously. We made a little bit of everything at home. And as we started to think more and more about, going legit, we were at the same time really falling in love with our rum experiments at home, as well as just the category of rum in general, which has so much to offer, and I think has this massive gulf between the public perception of the category in general versus the breadth and depth and quality of what's out there.
Yeah.
Particularly in the U.S. craft distilling scene, which has been so focused on whiskey, gin, vodka. So we got really excited about what we were making, the category in general, and the opportunity to do something a little different and a little new. And that all came together into a few year process of trying to raise the money, go through all the red tape, the construction. But now we've been making rum in DC in this facility for about 7.5 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that you had made that mention about why you wanted to go into rum, because it's probably pretty easy. And maybe down the road you want to make a bourbon or a whiskey or of some sort, but everyone wants that. And I love that you're trying to break through and trying to make a good rum, because I love rum. And there's a lot of good rums out there, but I think you're right. The perception is that it's not what the market wants, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So what was that decision process like for a small business breaking into the distilling, the craft distillery world, which is controlled by by bourbon? How does that process look?
It is, let's see. It's a little bit the same and a little bit different from if we were starting up a bourbon brand, for example. Same in that, we're going to need all the same permits and most of the same equipment and all that kind of stuff. So, the craft spirits community is so supportive and such a tight-knit community that when you're starting up, one of the most valuable resources for any prospective distiller is just, set up a time, go see another local distiller and say like, hey, where'd you buy that? What did that cost? What was the permit deal for this? Like, do you have a guy for that?
Yeah.
So we were able to get the benefit of all that kind of experience and, community spirit. But at the same time, when you're setting up in rum, there are definitely a couple key differences. One, we're not at any point dealing with a large quantity of solids, unlike somebody who's working from grain.
Yeah.
So that is great when you are rapidly running out of money as you're building your distillery and you're like, oh, cool, we don't need, X, Y, and Z pieces of equipment, or this one can be a little cheaper than it would be if we also had to separate and, and sparge and whatever stuff they have to do that I don't even know about.
Right.
We're working from goop, so that's a little easier on the equipment front,
Right.
Arguably. But two, you can set up your I would say entire company, brand, and facility a little bit differently if you are not trying to dive into something that necessarily must barrel age for years,
Right.
In order to be its best version of itself. Rum has there are of course barrel aged rums, and you can go to the store and get a 20-year rum that's amazing. Aging does all the same stuff to rum that it does to all the other spirits we love, but there's also great unaged rums and flavored rums and rum-based liqueurs, and there is just a lot you can do there in a smaller facility like ours. So we've been here 7.5 years, like I said, and this place is only 3,400 square feet. And we've been able to do kind of a lot, but the only one of our core products, these are our core 5 products here. The only one with an age statement now is the gold rum, and that's only as of a year ago.
Oh, wow.
And that's a 1-year product. So the dark goes a couple of years in new oak, but we actually blend that back with young rum and then finish that in a sherry barrel. So in a tiny facility, we can make a lot of different products that are, fully expressed ideas, we think. So
that always interests me because the especially the whiskey market, that is such an investment of time and resource and
Yes.
space. You don't really need that time or space based on what you just told me, which is kind of neat.
Yeah.
When you first started, were you just doing white rum just because we could get it out the door, or how did that?
Yeah. So we did want to start up with a couple of different products out of the gate, and we also wanted to make all our products ourselves rather than sourcing anything, which, just to ideology up front out of the way, I don't have any problem with sourcing stuff. Transparency is the important thing. But for us, we wanted to, ferment and distill and everything here.
Yeah.
So when we opened our doors, we had a white rum and a spiced rum that we have now discontinued, but those were our 2 launch products, and then we've kind of grown from there. Mm-hmm. The white now sees about 6 months in steel. That's about it. But yeah, when we first opened our doors, it had seen about 5 minutes, because we actually, our first batch was the week we had scheduled our opening party, and we really needed to start bringing in some cash because, like a lot of people in that very first period, we had spent all the money we raised and then some, and we had made a stupid math error somewhere along the way and overproofed, added too much water to our white rum, so we were way too low. We were like, well outside of our label range. So we had to redistill the whole batch, and it was like right before we were open. Anyway, so a bunch of stuff that we are now either too smart or experienced, or I don't know, scarred by past mistakes to not do again. But yeah,
that's awesome. So when were you a rum guy? In your younger days, what informed you to get into the spirits industry?
Yeah. So let me see. I would not say that prior to getting into the home distilling hobby, I was necessarily a rum guy or an anything else guy. I was an equal opportunity spirits dude.
Whatever you were handed at the party.
Yeah, precisely. So
I've been there.
But then as I started trying to educate myself more, and by other means than drinking whatever was handed to me and going like, I like that, I don't like that, which is important as well. Yeah. But so is, reading. The rum really started to grab me. It's got so much history to it, in the U.S., which is one, I think, underappreciated element of rum in this country. It really was the quintessential spirit of what's now the U.S. for a good couple hundred years. And the whole U.S. East Coast, from Savannah, Georgia, even up through Atlantic Canada, rum distilling territory. There was a history professor, Professor McCusker at University of Maryland, who did a lot of work on the history of rum in the colonial U.S., and he's actually got some, if you're a Mondo nerd like me, fascinating data from digging through, British colonial tax records on by year, by colony, how much rum was produced, consumed there, imported from which other colony, whether that, was in the original 13 or Barbados or Jamaica.
Sure.
So it's kind of cool because you can go back to 1770 and see like, oh, in that year, Maryland distilled something like 160,000 gallons of rum or something. You think of the mid-Atlantic distilling tradition. Usually what comes to mind would be Maryland and Pennsylvania rye whiskey, which of course was also big, but Philly, Baltimore, these were big rum producing cities and ports before rye whiskey started to become a thing.
Yeah.
So most famously in the US, New England was a big rum producing center, but the story is farther flung than that. It wasn't just a Massachusetts, Rhode Island thing. Everybody was making rum.
It's pretty wild that history has changed. I mean, like you said, rum was quintessential. I mean, prior to America's founding and then during. Mm-hmm. I mean, George Washington himself, aside from making rye whiskey, he also made rum. And I know Steve Bayshore is the distiller over at Mount Vernon, and they make a rum once in a while, but the market doesn't really gravitate towards it. And I'm really curious about, now you only have a rum product. Mm-hmm. Have you had any pushback from the market? Has that been an ongoing battle? Or
yes.
Yes. But I was also on top of that is DC is kind of barren with distilleries. All the distilleries are mostly around Maryland and Virginia. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's kind of a kickback to that. Like, yeah, we're the only rum distillery, but we're also successful because we're the few here.
Yeah, it's, let me see. Where to begin on the challenges question? There are many. So thing one is that people, there is not this broad awareness either of rum's 400-year history here, or of the fact that anybody is making it here today. There's a lot of like, oh, whoa, you can do that, or people come in because they hear that we're a distillery and they're like, cool, yeah, we'll try the bourbon. It's like, actually, we do rum. So there's just an expectation. You see a lot of people go through like wait, what do you mean? Surely you misspoke. But that carries through not only those interactions, but also in the broader marketplace, because the U.S. rum producing tradition really kind of died its final death in the early 20th century with the closure of the last of the Massachusetts rum distillers prior to Prohibition.
Yeah.
Because of the way regulations are set up right now, there's not really a quintessential domestic rum style. Whereas with all kinds of exceptions, there are kind of prevailing styles in a lot of the big rum producing countries and territories. Somebody who drinks a lot of rum, if you say, pour you a glass of a Puerto Rican white rum, and I won't tell you which one, and also you can't taste or smell it. What do you think it tastes like? They could probably tell you,
Sure.
okay, well, based on the regulations there and the traditions and prevailing taste, it's probably going to be pretty light and clean, a little touch of, vanilla, but it's going to be, a relatively light spirit. Do the same for Jamaica. They'll go, oh, well, I'm going to assume it's going to be really rich and funky and fruity and heavy. And so on for a bunch of different, rum producing territories. US, not the case. So if you're going out to the store and you're spending your hard-earned $30-$40 on a bottle of rum and you haven't tried it before, maybe you're going to go for one from a place where origin is a shorthand for style to a degree.
Sure.
So I do think that is a challenge for domestic rum in general. Because in the US, let's see. So our federal regulators, the TTB, they set the definition of class and style. Class as in whiskey, style as in bourbon, rye, whatever, a blend of straight rye bourbons. Within that, they've got, I think it's 42 or 43 different subtypes of whiskey based on relative proportion of grain and what kind of cooperage and what's your distillation proof and
Right.
A million different factors.
Mm-hmm.
For rum, there are two types, and they are rum and flavored rum. So you can make rum from a bunch of different derivatives of the sugarcane plant. You can make it in a zillion different ways. You could age it in a zillion different ways. There are a ton of different subtypes in the rum consciousness and community, but not in the regs. So when you're a U.S. rum producer, it's not laid out like it would be if you're doing bourbon, that it's like, all right, well, you're going to use as much corn and you're going to distill to this proof and you're going to age at this proof and this
Right.
kind of barrel. It's kind of like sugarcane, go nuts, which is cool, but also a bit of a challenge relative to somewhere like, if you look at the rum regs in Martinique, which is an overseas department of France, they have in classic French style, a 1 zillion page long regulation. Well, if you're going to call it a rum agricole from Martinique, you're going to distill between these dates and you're going to ferment for this many hours, and your still column is going to be this many centimeters wide with this spacing between the plates,
You're right.
Whereas, US, it's like sugarcane, rum.
Some of my favorite facts about craft distilling across all the spirits is your room to play, right? You're not kind of controlled by a big corporate monster telling you what to do and when to do it.
Yep.
You are, co-owner with another person, and you can do whatever you want. But from what you just told me, it sounds like even rum has even more room to experiment. Your leash is even longer than what the bourbon, regulations require for those distilleries. They still do a lot of cool things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Has that been part of the fun of the job?
Definitely, because while that can be a challenge from a market standpoint to a degree, it is an opportunity from a production and kind of product philosophy standpoint. What do we want to do? Nobody's telling us what our style has to be, so let's experiment and let's figure it out. And what we've done is, maybe this is a good segue to our first
You're professional.
sip of the day. So
Please.
Our white rum is going to be the most unadulterated expression of our rum production philosophy, because it's, after distillation, it's going to hang out in steel for a few months. We do a very light filtration, add proofing water. That's it. So all of anything in here is what occurs in our ingredients, what the yeast do to them, and how we distill it. So we start off with a blend of cane syrup and blackstrap molasses, which are both brown sugarcane derived goops, but are very different products, actually. And we have a blend of about 75% cane syrup, 25% blackstrap molasses. And Those each are kind of bringing something different to the table. So we wanted to make a white rum that's got a lot of complexity and personality right off the still. And using a blend of different substrates is a great way to achieve that. I guess you might think of that like in the whiskey world, your corn and your rye and your malted barley are all bringing something different to the table.
Sure.
Ditto in rum, why not mix it up a little bit?
Yeah.
And those are each reminiscent of different rum traditions as well. So cane syrup is going to be, you juice a sugarcane stalk, the liquid content you get from that, the fresh sugarcane juice, is going to be, call it 15% sugar, mostly water, but crushed up everything that occurs in that plant itself, and the dirt that's on there, and the ash from when they burn the fields as part of the harvest in a lot of locations, and all that mixed up in there. Cane syrup is going to be that juice evaporate off a bunch of the water content, and usually they'll add a little bit of like soda lime to clarify it, drop out some of those impurities as well. But it's basically going to be cane juice, water evaporated off. So it retains a bit of the grassiness and some of the like vegetal quality of the sugarcane plant itself.
Interesting.
And it's actually, that used to be a common sweetener in the American South, because it's easy to make at home, unlike molasses, our other goop, which is the byproduct of sugar refining. So if you'll indulge my sugarcane refining tangent here.
Yeah.
I don't mean to stop you from sipping that.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
I want to hear the story before I drink it.
So the next step, if you are going to continue on turning that cane syrup into a crystallized sugar product, which is the goal of the entire sugar industry, is let's get that nice flavor neutral sweetener that's shelf stable, to the end of the universe, out of that mixture of everything that occurs in that sugarcane juice. So what you're going to do is take that cane syrup. You've lost a bunch of the water. Now you already have a much higher concentration of sugar. What you do nowadays, since like the mid 19th century, is put it into a giant vacuum pan, throw in some crystallized sugar from a previous batch, and let it cool a bit. And essentially sugar crystals are going to form in that syrup. So now you've got a bunch of solid crystallized sugar floating around in goop. You can separate the two these days in a centrifuge, like a salad spinner kind of deal.
Right.
Goop out, sugar in. Do that a number of times. Long story short, you've got sugar and molasses. So molasses is, after we've removed as much sugar as we can economically afford to do, concentrated down everything else that was in the cane juice when we juiced those cane stalks. So it still has sugar. You can't really remove it all, or it's not economical to do so. But it's really high in things like a bunch of minerals, bunch of salt. There's a bunch of metal content. There's a lot of ash content. There's a lot of stuff along with that sugar. So that is a flavorful blend, which is great if you're making a spirit. You want that flavor to come through. Is less great if you are looking for a versatile ingredient in your home kitchen cabinet, because molasses, it has that strong flavor. You mix it in something, you're gonna know it. It's gonna change the flavor, unlike sugar. This is why molasses has always been a lot less valuable than crystallized sugar, and it's why the rum industry really started. It's like, we're trying to make sugar, we wind up with molasses. What the hell are we gonna do with all of it? I guess we could turn it into booze, actually. So anyway, different rum producing countries make their rums out of different things. Molasses is the traditional base for rums in most English-speaking places, Jamaica, Barbados, most Spanish-speaking places. If you think, Puerto Rico, and Dominican Republic. Fresh cane juice, just press those stalks. Don't do any of that refining stuff. Let's just ferment and distill the cane juice itself. This is all generalizing a bit, just asterisk on these pronouncements, but generally places that speak French and Portuguese are going to be making their spirits out of the fresh cane juice.
Interesting.
So grassy rum agricole, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Haiti, French Guiana, but also the Portuguese islands in the Atlantic, and then Brazil. Cachaça is from fresh pressed cane juice. You might consider that in the rum family. Cane syrup is used in a number of largely Spanish-speaking places, but in that don't wind up using molasses. So anyway, for us, the blend of the molasses and the cane syrup brings in a variety of different like geographic and historic and cultural influences. We get that heavy, rich molassesy stuff that's kind of characteristic of heavy, rich Anglophone rum styles. The cane syrup brings in some delicate grassiness that reminds you a touch of some of those French and Portuguese influences. And we ferment actually with two different yeast strains. We get the two substrates, two yeast strains. 75% of our wash we ferment with a wild sugarcane yeast strain that builds up some of the grassiness you expect in those fresh cane juice based rum styles. And about 25% will ferment with a wine yeast strain that builds up some like rich tropical fruit notes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we ferment for 5 and 6 days, which, depending who you ask, is relatively long. A lighter, cleaner, more neutral rum style like a Bacardi or Don Q, they might do like a 36-hour quick fermentation. Let's create the booze, and we're going for something crisp that does great in like a mojito daiquiri. Something like a super funky rum in Jamaica, they might go for months with a bacterial component. So 5-6 days, a little bit in the middle there, builds up a little more texture, creaminess, a bit more fruit. And we run it through our still. So we got a hybrid 6-plate still from Bridgetown Brew Systems. So we do stripping run with all our plates deactivated in here, and we'll be at about like 90 proof there. Combine 4 stripping runs worth together in the still, and that's where those two different fermentations commingle.
Yeah.
For our spirit run, where we're going to take it up to about 181, and that is also a little bit of a kind of balancing act. We're trying to keep in a lot of that stuff we built in fermentation, but hit a high enough proof that we're light enough that it does great in some of those crisp mojito daiquiri, etc. So long way of saying that we try and have this essentially act like a some of the multi-island blends you see in the rum world, where it's we'll take a little light rum from the DR, and we'll take a little heavy rum from Jamaica, and we'll take a little of this from there and blend it all together, and it's got a little something of everything. We want our rum to act like that, but from a single distillery. So it's kind of like American melting pot style of influences.
I love that.
Now we can finally drink it.
Well, cheers for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for coming.
I love that it's just an unaged white rum that a lot of people just think of like, oh, Bacardi. You actually have a story and an informed decision behind making it. That's really cool. And in my brain, and this is why I love doing this, conversation with people like you in this industry, it makes it taste better. Mm-hmm. It makes it local. You're here in DC making it with a lot of TLC. Your hands are on the wheel, right? I'm sure there's a lot of pride behind that too. You made something that tastes good.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. This winds up being the product that I would say, nerd out over the most for a bunch of reasons. One, because it's not seeing barrel time or any flavor or sugar added, any little, variation or mistake or what have you that we make in managing our ferments or distillation, any part of the process, there's nowhere to hide that mistake. And there are fewer opportunities to try and layer in additional character. It's all just like ingredient, ferment, distillation. Hope goes right.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, I think, one that, when we get like a big rum nerd coming in, they're like, the white rum, that's what we got to try.
It's where we're going to find all the impurities.
Yeah,
right.
And, and like, that's I don't know, it'll really show like, what's your style, and like, how are you doing it before that gets, depending on what you're interested in looking for, either enhanced or stepped on by time in a barrel or flavors or what have you. So
Sure.
But we've also won the most awards for this, which, awards are a nice thing. They're not the whole universe, obviously, but last week they announced the results of this year's San Francisco World Spirits Competition. It's like the Oscars of booze, and we got platinum medal for this, which means double gold 3 years in a row.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool for tiny little us. We got, so what was it? In 2022, we got our first double gold for this, and we got best of class. So of all the white rums, they were like, that's the one.
That's cool.
Which was crazy. And then last year, 23, the finalists for best of class were us and 10 to 1, which is, one of the multi-island blends like I referred to before. Very tasty stuff. And they won it. So we're like, okay, that's like second place. That's pretty good. Because the first year we were like, this is a crazy fluke, right? Did we get the right email? And then the second year was like, I guess we're maybe kind of good at this. And then, consistency is such a hard thing to pull off in the food and beverage world at a small scale. So the 3 years in a row is a very proud,
very validating
achievement for us. Yeah, absolutely. I can attest it does not translate instantly to a bunch of cash hitting your account somehow from the universe. But
hey, y'all, Alan Cogan here with Crafted Conversations. If you want to support the show and the mission of sharing the stories of craft, head over to buymeacoffee.com/craftedconvos. I'd really appreciate throwing a couple bucks my way to help me pay for travel, the equipment that I use, the time that I spend editing, all the software that I use. I really appreciate any support you can give me. And if you can't afford a couple bucks, at least give me some feedback or go over to our YouTube and subscribe or follow us on Spotify. Anything helps to make sure that we share the story of craft and give these small business owners a little limelight and get them out on a platform that really showcases what they're doing. I can't do this without you guys or your support, so I would really appreciate you pitching in and helping out. So I'll see you out there, and I really appreciate it. Cheers. I think you're on your way. I do, before we go to the next sample, because I'm curious how the barrel flavor, I'm assuming it's the same juice.
Yes.
Just barrel aged. I'm curious how the startup in DC, where the Wild West of regulations, I mean, I know they don't have an actual distillery designation yet, do they? It's like that weird bar/deli.
So that's a weird, depends on which agency you ask in DC. So
of course,
for our alcohol regulators, they rebranded, and I've been saying ABRA for years, but now it's ABCA because they added cannabis. So every time I say it, I have to pause for a second. It's like, I don't know, it's like they changed the word it's like
yeah.
I really don't have to think about this. ABCA, they have a distillery license class, and there's a distillery pub license class as well. But where it gets weird is the other agencies that oversee, everything else that a business does do not have a category for distilleries. And that is where any distillery you go to here, some of them have their business license and their certificate of occupancy are like, you're a deli, we think, or so for us, we're just a general business. So that winds up having, carrying through, I don't know how things like the health department and whatnot wind up interacting with you based on what that agency says. So
that's so weird.
It's very weird. But yeah, DC, is kind of an interesting little little place for alcohol policy for small distilleries. Very friendly from a regulation standpoint. We're allowed to serve cocktails for on-site consumption, which is allowed in, a growing number of states, but not all by any means. You go to Virginia, for example, they can't mix a cocktail and sell it to you at their distillery, right?
No, I think they're limited to like 4 ounces or something.
Yeah.
Or 2 ounces.
And like just as a tasting, right? We're allowed to sell you bottles to go and an unlimited number of bottles as well. So some states, Virginia, again, across the river, in your tasting room, if you sell a bottle to a guest, you're actually technically an outpost of the state ABC system, and you get a 20% commission on the sale of the bottle.
Right.
Here, we made this, you give me $30, I give you this. That's it. Like, nobody else is involved in that transaction. And if you want 1 or you want 100, fine. A lot of states will have a requirement that, you actually like keep a log, and you can't sell more than, in some places it's simpler, like more than 2 bottles per person per day. But some people it's like, well, you can't sell more than 12 bottles to a single person within a calendar year. It's like, how do they?
Who's tracking that?
Right. I don't. Not me, thankfully.
You just have a ledger of someone's name.
Sounds like a nightmare. Yeah, it's like
here.
Also, can we get a bottle? Like, hold on, let me flip through our.
Check in with your GPS.
Right. Yeah. Let me scan your microchip.
What's funny is because Grant and I both born and raised Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which and you can buy Everclear at your local Walgreens. Like it's just wide open.
Yeah.
And so I moved to Virginia, and the ABC store was kind of foreign to me.
Yeah.
But I've heard there's a lot of pros and cons, because I've heard a lot of distillers, small guys, kind of love that they just have instant access to distribution to all the stores, but they take a haircut on the profit.
Yeah.
And then you go into DC and you can just go into any store. But as a Scotch drinker myself, I love getting, nice Scotches. The secondary market in both DC and Maryland, you go to a liquor store and it's just like, oh, well, that is marked up 50%.
Yep.
So it's like, oh, there's an MSRP benefit for the consumer at the ABC store. But for you have a lot more freedom to just sell and make it. I think Maryland has weird laws where if you have a distillery and a cocktail bar, you have to make all of the ingredients. You have to make your own vermouth. You have to make your own liqueurs to mix. It's interesting. And I always love hearing different things, because DC, not a state as of recording.
Right.
Something could change tomorrow.
That would be cool. But I doubt it.
It's always interesting to hear those stories.
Yeah. And so it's also constantly evolving everywhere. So the other distilleries that predate us in DC, so there was New Columbia, which made Green Hat Gin. They were the first to open in DC in, I think, 2012. So when they opened up, you were only allowed to do tastings for guests. I don't remember if you were allowed to charge them. And over time, all the distillers, every year would go to the DC Council and say, hey, it would help a lot if, the arbitrary restriction that we only be allowed to do X, Y, or Z were expanded to include W, and so on every year. So that we were not yet open, but we're involved in that process a little bit, along with the established guys while we were in the process of opening up. It did change over time. I think at first, when we'd be allowed to sell cocktails, I think the first year of that law, the allowable hours were only 1 to 9 p.m., which is not great.
Yeah.
Let me see. I don't recall if at first, maybe like in Maryland, every single ingredient had to be made by you. I can make you a rum and tonic, but I can't make you a rum Manhattan because of the vermouth, like you were saying.
Right.
And then they allowed cocktails including other alcoholic ingredients as long as the majority of the alcohol was produced on site. But then back to who's enforcing that. Right. They're not coming in and going like, show me the cocktail recipe. Okay, wait, and the vermouth was what percent? Yeah. Okay, and that's 3/4. No, like the first few times that we had inspectors from APCA come in here, they go inspect bars and restaurants and liquor stores all day, every day. There's a couple distilleries. They came in here and they're like, hey, so what are your rules? Like they're not going to come in and be like, all right, we're checking for XYZ. So they got rid of that. Now, as long as a cocktail contains some alcohol that we produce, we can sell it here for on-site consumption.
Interesting.
So that's the kind of thing that is definitely like the envy of distillers in a lot of other states.
Yeah.
When I go to the ACSA conference, for example, people are like, oh man, in DC, you guys got it so good. We got to get that over here and, pick your state. And part of that I would say is because unlike most states or many states, there's not a big history of alcohol manufacturing within DC, within the last, I don't know, century. So there's not a weird holdover of like, well, the law has always been this weird restrictive thing. So we're not going to, we're not fighting to change a weird restrictive law. It's like, hey, this industry is like brand new. Can we put in that we can do X, Y, and Z now?
Yeah.
So I think that's helpful, as well as you said, we're not a state. So we're not working through a huge legislative apparatus. It's a council of 13 people for the district, it's a council and the mayor. And, they have been pretty cooperative and like excited about this new, I don't know. I think DC definitely has a bit of a chip on its shoulder about like proving that we're not just the city where like senators and the president live. It's like we're a real place where,
you have small businesses.
A lot of people live and do normal stuff actually.
Right.
Like whatever, manufacturing or work at a bar or a restaurant. So they're I would say have been in general pretty supportive of moving all those laws in the right direction. So I mean, we could be open till 3 a.m. now on Fridays and Saturdays. We usually close at 2, but
sure.
From whatever 6 years ago, it was 9 p.m. I don't know, like that's in the world of alcohol law, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I would think that people who want to buy cocktails after 9 p.m. I would.
Can confirm. Yeah.
Well, speaking of change, you're gonna love the segue.
All right.
I'm curious how the barrel changes the white rum. See what I did? That was pretty good. I'm proud of that one.
Nicely done. How could I have forgotten that we need to keep tasting my stuff? So we've got the gold up next. So the gold, there's always got to be a stopover on regulatory talk for a second when I'm involved, unfortunately. So very common phrases in the rum world, like gold rum, dark rum, white rum. If we rewind to when I was saying there are only 2 types of rum regulated in the US, rum and flavored rum. Gold rum doesn't necessarily mean anything about how it was produced, ditto dark rum, etc. Some of the best examples of that are, there are white rums that are very popular that are aged 3 years and then filtered to remove the color.
Right.
So like white rum does not necessarily mean unaged. And there are dark rums and gold rums where if you're trying to research and figure out like, so how long did that spend in the barrel? Good luck, because maybe none, but they certainly won't tell you. But it's, they'll add caramel coloring and that kind of thing.
I didn't think about that. My brain always thought white just meant unaged because whiskey, white dog, etc. So
right,
interesting. It's not even controlled.
Not in the U.S. So sometimes this is another place where country of origin can help you out. A lot of Spanish-speaking places, in order to call it rum at all, it must be aged at least a year in oak. Otherwise, it's aguardiente.
Okay, that's right.
So a lot of white rums from Spanish-speaking countries will be aged in typically used bourbon barrels because they're not trying to get real oaky. They're trying to relax it, get a touch of that influence, and then filter it so that, in your cocktail, it looks like this, not like that.
Right.
There's a huge difference between color and age in the rum world, which is kind of a little bit of like a brain-breaking thing sometimes. That's all wind up to say, okay, so what does gold rum mean to us then.
Right.
It means something to people, and therefore we embrace those terms. I do think you have in the rum nerd world, which I do say lovingly and including myself, but there's certainly different philosophies and whatnot within there that, well, gold rum doesn't mean anything, dark rum doesn't mean anything, we shouldn't use those terms. I kind of disagree because it means something to people. I think our goal should be like meeting them where they're at and, talking about what does that mean for our process, and not saying like, gold rum, you're wrong, that's stupid, and
Right.
you're stupid.
Yeah.
It's like, no, what that generally means to people is, it should be a little richer and heavier than a white rum, maybe. Kind of a versatile category, might be rich enough to, sip on its own, or
Sure.
certainly to make cocktails, but maybe a little bit of a wider breadth of cocktails than get you involved there. Then you might be able to with a cleaner, lighter rum, but not be so heavy as what you think of as a dark rum.
Yeah.
It's in the middle.
Right.
So for us, the vast majority of what winds up in here, in about the 99% range, is same distillate as our white rum into used bourbon barrels for at least a year. These days, more like 18 months. And the remainder of the blend is going to be 3+ year aged in Amburana barrels. So that's a Brazilian wood that you see in some fancy cachaça. And it is extremely, extremely flavorful. You typically see, if you see an Amburana cachaça out there, this wood acts very differently from oak. It gives up a ton of flavor really quickly. So there are cachaça brands out there that have got a ton of Amburana flavor, and they'll have a giant, few thousand gallon Amburana tank going there for a few weeks. Our stuff is in a, 53 gallon, maybe 60 gallon Amburana barrels, and sat in there for years. So that was not our choice. That was because we wanted to do an Amburana gold rum. We got to get our labels and formulas approved by the TTB. And they were like, we've never heard of Amburana, so no, you can't do that. But we'd already filled 5 barrels, and we're like, well, what are we going to do with all this stuff now? So we just have been sitting on those barrels waiting to be allowed to do something with it.
Oh, wow.
And so now that stuff on its own is crazy. It's over the top. It's not, to me, it kind of tastes like if you dissolved violet candies in vanilla extract. It's just like, it's too much. But as 1%, it brings so much kind of vanilla and baking spice and like cinnamon bun banana bread to a fruity, coconutty base that pulls that, vanilla honey stuff out of the American oak. And altogether, it's just really friendly, tastes very different, but inviting, and just, I don't know, we have a big crush on this one. We reformulated it just about a year ago.
Okay.
And because now the TTB was like, oh, you can, that's fine. You can use that.
Amburana has become kind of a breakout cask finish in, and I've always thought of like Cinnamon Toast Crunch a little bit.
Yes, absolutely.
That is a brain breaker. I didn't expect that at all.
It's a very fun product because it can do so much. Like, there is plenty of depth and interest to just sip on this like this with the cube, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's also light enough that it does great in refreshing cocktails. It does, because it's mostly that second fill bourbon barrels. It doesn't have that, strong oaky, like astringency that sometimes can not go great with lime in particular, which is the base for a lot of rummy cocktails.
Right.
So this one kind of does it all, but it also does a great old fashioned. We team this up at our bar with we kind of mix it up for the seasons, but we're doing that with a bourbon right now.
Oh man. Well, that's I have a crush on that now too. That's
all right.
Oh my God. Kudos to that. That's fun. I love the story that, you have these barrels sitting that you couldn't do anything with, and I'll say, hey, what if we did this?
Yeah.
It's almost like a happy accident.
Yeah, definitely.
You know?
And that's one of the things over the years, things are not going to go as you plant them to all the time,
No.
but sometimes that's for the best in the long run.
Right.
Case in point.
I love it. So next is the PX Dark.
Yes.
I'm a big sherry fan.
Well,
so I saw this when I was doing my just preliminary research of who you were and what you made.
Mm-hmm.
And my ears opened up and I'm like, ooh, what's that?
Yeah.
So tell me about it.
So, PX Dark. This one sees a pretty different barrel journey than the Gold. This starts off in New American Oak. So, that is not common in the rum world, but of course is vital to American whiskey, bourbon and rye, and therefore that's a very kind of cornerstone flavor for American drinkers and spirits fans.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to do something that bridges that gap and is like, oh, you're a bourbon guy. We start off aging this the same way. There's kind of building a little bridge there. And there are a couple of U.S. rum distilleries doing the same thing because it's kind of like a oh duh.
Right.
So anyway, we go nowadays. We're going about a little over 2 years in the New Oak, and we blend that back actually with unaged rum after we pull from the New Oak barrels. And that is why there is not an age statement on this product. And there are a couple reasons for that, because then the natural question is, well, wait, why do you do that? You just aged it. Why are you? So a couple reasons. One, it winds up being too dominated by the oak after just a couple years in those New Oak barrels. Mm-hmm. It is, every time we make a batch, we adjust the blend of aged to unaged, because at our small scale, we have 90 barrels total aging right now. So when we're pulling, 6 barrels to blend out a batch of this, every time it's going to be pretty different. But generally, we wind up being too dominated by oak, a little astringent, kind of hiding the rumminess a bit. And the unaged rum brings some of that soft, fruity stuff back into it. So we'll blend that up and then load it into a used Pedro Jimenez sherry cask for about 3 months. So that winds up bringing us a little bit of kind of like reddish color, as you can see, but also plenty of, nice figgy, raisiny, dried fruit business. And then we'll add a little bit of molasses to this before we bottle it as well, so you get a little bit of sweetness too.
So it's got back sweetened to.
Yep.
Okay.
And which we put the latest stats for that on our website too, because that is another thing that winds up being like a hot button kind of ideological debate in the rum world as well, is like, should you add sugar? Should you be allowed to add sugar? If you do, you're not required to disclose it, but should you? So we just like to put all that info out there.
Yeah.
And actually ditto on the Gold rum. That's depends a little on the batch, but call it 7 to 9 grams per liter sugar on that. So for us, again, it's like, what tastes good, and then let's just tell people that we did it.
Yeah,
there you
transparency is, Matt. I think that's part part of the locality, the smallness, the small business, the fact that I can sit down with one of the owners right here without a PR firm, and that you're transparent and open about what the product. I think people are gravitating more and more towards that.
Yeah.
And I hope that continues because,
hey, me too.
Listen, some of the big guys, the Bacardis of the world, the Buffalo Traces of the world, that's fine. They make good product for what it is.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're threatened by anybody like you.
Certainly not.
It's a coexistence.
Or they shouldn't be.
It's a coexistence, and I think there's a lot of room on the market.
Yeah.
So I love that. I think power to. I have talked to some people on the podcast, and it's not recorded, but I have talked to people who are like, I won't name drop, but they're like, oh yeah, well we don't even tell people our mash bill. We don't tell people what we were. It's like, but does it matter? Because even if I replicate that, it's going to taste different.
Right.
So
completely agree. Because it's I don't know. It's a lot of what we want to do is like educate people about the product. So I don't know, how am I going to do that if I'm like, I can't tell you anything.
It's a secret cane
just
sugar.
drink it. That's my pitch.
Just drink. That's a good marketing tactic.
Yeah.
Well, cheers to Sherry, because I'm looking forward to this. Oh wow, that drink's almost like a sherried Scotch.
Yeah, it's you get a lot of that nice sherry stuff, of course, on top of the fruity rumminess that's already in there and that's developed in the barrel. You get that new oak backbone, but it's in balance with the other influences there.
That would be phenomenal in a Manhattan.
Absolutely. That's a lot of what we definitely do a lot of bottles of this out of the tasting room here. And a lot of people, who are making cocktails at home will have been coming up on whiskey cocktails, because of course. So it's like old fashioned, this guy, Manhattan, this guy, easy. And whether you're replacing or mixing the whiskey with this, it goes great either way. So
that's cool. Are you what is your other spirit influence? What has kind of helped you? Because I'm sure you don't just drink rum or only your product. Maybe you do.
I get a good price. So
that's a good reason.
Let me see. I would say a variety of things that come to mind wind up being agave spirits as well as malt whiskeys. And for a couple reasons. One, all the huge variation within agave is really exciting, and so many new products come out on the market in the last few years. It's kind of like you couldn't taste them all if you tried. And
I'm trying.
Yeah, well, I wish your liver the best. So that's always fun to explore. And because, like I said, we spend so much time trying to think about our distillate more so than our barrel process. Stuff like mezcal that, often is going to be more focused on that ingredient fermentation distillation as opposed to the post-distillation aging, processing, etc.
Right.
Is fun academically to kind of learn about. And then also just love the depth and richness of malt whiskeys as well. So that's been an exciting thing. That's also probably because I feel a bit of like a kindred spiritness with the growing American single malt world, where people are like, wait a minute, that comes from somewhere else. And they're trying to establish this new category that people don't know what to expect of. So always excited to try new malt whiskeys, whether they're American or not. But
I love that because I think, bourbon has run the market. I think it would always will. It's a classic American spirit. We have specific laws for it. That's fine. Rye pre-prohibition was massive. Mm-hmm. Went away. and now I've seen a 5% growth every year with rye, and it's getting back. And I think there's a lot of great ryes. High rye bourbon and high wheat bourbons are there.
Yep.
I know American single malt is now all the rage. Everyone's freaking out about it, and I love it. I love malty, chocolately flavors.
Yep.
I love a malted rye. But American agave is the weird one that just started a couple of years ago,
right?
And it's not the same as tequila, but it's essentially tequila for people who don't know the difference. And how does that marketing work when you have an American agave spirit next to a tequila? Who's going to buy what? Everyone's going to buy the tequila because they know what it is.
Right.
But I'm curious to see how that blows up in the next couple of years.
Definitely.
And also the American rum market is kind of an unsung hero, underappreciated, as we've been talking about. The theme of all this is that, this is just as complex and fun to, experiment with making it and drinking it.
Yep.
And I hope that breaks through because, I don't know, the market's fun to watch. I'm not an economist, so I'm a drinker. So.
Wait. The world needs those too.
Well, should we try the coconut rum? Because that sounds awesome.
I think we better. So the coconut rum story for us starts off with that I love coconut anything. Coconut is my favorite flavor. My mom grew up in Honolulu, and so when I was a kid growing up, we were always getting like I grew up in Connecticut. Not Honolulu.
Very different.
Yes. So her family there would like send us care packages all the time and a bunch of like coconut products, and we'd go visit my, cousins and stuff there. And so from when I was a kid, it was like things that have coconut, that's a special treat, and always loved it. And therefore, when I, at too young an age, first encountered coconut flavored spirits, terrible disappointment.
Yeah.
They do not taste like coconut.
No.
They taste like you told a robot what coconut tastes like, and it was like, enter flavor parameters. So we started messing around with coconut rum R&D here, and I think pretty quickly ran into probably why a lot of the coconut spirits and beverages in general tend to rely on those, flavor additives as opposed to actual coconut, and the resulting products reflect that. Because coconut has a whole lot of fat in it, and that is not only one of the things that's great about it, but it also makes it kind of difficult to keep in solution, not looking like a bottle of salad dressing all separated out, right? So a little bit of a challenge. So we wind up now with, we bought a much more expensive and fancier filter than we ever had previously after doing a test batch of this. And now we have what I think is a deceptively simple process, and I'm like, why is everyone not doing this? It's very good. I'm biased, but all we do is take our unaged rum and soak it on a whole lot of dried organic coconut flake for usually about 72 hours, strain it off, and then we pass that through our filter a number of times, and then we add a bit of sugar to this one as well. It's kind of interesting when you taste this before we add the sugar. You're like, yeah, it's coconutty, I guess. And it's one of those things where, I don't know, almost like salt enhancing flavor. Like you're used to encountering coconut in sweetened applications often. You add enough sugar, in our case, to take it to 35 grams a liter, which is the amount of sugar you find in coconut water in a coconut, because sugar occurs in there. Your brain is like, that's what coconut tastes like. So it does like an accentuating effect. So we bottle this at 32.5% alcohol, and over time we'll develop some haze, especially in winter. Some of that oil will start to flock out a bit because it's a bit of a balancing act. We want it to look nice and clean and not have an oil slick on top, but that fat is key to the texture of this and contains so much of the coconut flavor that, we need to filter out enough, but not too much.
Right. Okay. Have you ever played with like steeping actual coconut, or because I know like Paturo is known for just not aging, but you're basically steeping like a tea bag of just fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Has that ever been a thought, or is that just way too much to deal with?
Well, our thing is like a larger version of that, basically. We have basically a big tank with a false bottom on it, and we just load up the bottom, foot of that winds up being dried coconut flake, and then load it up with the rum for a couple days. So, allspice dram. Last but not least, so allspice dram is a rum-based liqueur, and it's here you go.
Thank you.
It is a cocktail ingredient that has seen, a little bit of a moment in the last handful of years. There are some classic cocktails and plenty of tiki cocktails that call for allspice dram, but it is, as I understand it, originally from Jamaica, and when everybody, stopped drinking cocktails in the 70s and 80s, the remaining Jamaican brands stopped exporting, maybe stopped producing. So there's a couple of little brands of allspice dram kind of bringing back that along with other kind of lost cocktail ingredients and liqueurs, right?
Gotcha.
So it is traditionally going to be rum-based, low 20s alcohol content, and have a whole lot of baking spice flavor to it because you're going to soak your rum on allspice berries. And a little bit of that in a cocktail is going to, because it is a liqueur, therefore heavily sweetened, bring sweetness, but also a little bit of this really transforms a cocktail with that rich allspice, kind of cinnamon, ginger, peppery spice.
Yeah.
In a way that you will not be surprised to hear makes it very popular come November, December. It's very, doing tastings of this, people are like, Christmas. Like,
yep.
Correct.
That put a little dash of this on a hottie toddy.
Yes, exactly. It's, if you're trying to do a toddy or a nog or a what have you, a mulled this or that, that's, I call it the seasonal cheat code in fall and winter.
I really love that, like that allspice sweetness on the front, and then there's a lot of pepper in the back, kind of zippy.
Yes,
that's really unique.
Yeah, and there is a very good reason for that. So your classic allspice dram is flavored with just allspice. Ours is a little bit broader. So we have a few things that accentuate the pepperiness which is inherent to allspice, but we also do put in black pepper and Szechuan peppercorn and a bit of ginger, and a touch of cayenne. So allspice is very much in the lead, but we want to build that up with complementary spices.
Yeah.
So we've got, those bring in that pepperiness and that heat. There's a little bit of gentian and burdock root, which bring like an earthy bitterness. We've got some cinnamon as well, just broadening out that baking spice spectrum. So it is very tasty. Allspice on its own, when you build it with just allspice, to us it can be a little overly kind of tannic in one note. Allspice, it's a tiny little berry. It's got all that berry skin. So like grape skin, which has that like drying, puckering tannic effect, you get the same thing if you just go all in heavy on allspice. So for us, we achieve, a similar effect, but I think wind up with a more versatile and kind of drinkable on its own product. We have a lot of people who just drink that as like a little digestif after dinner.
Yeah, that's perfect. And it's what, 24-25% that I see.
Yeah,
that's
it's
awesome.
Kind of, I call it like Amaro Junior sometimes because it's got a touch of bitterness from those roots, but it's much softer, of course. And we sweeten it with molasses in addition to sugar, so bringing in some of that rummy richness as well.
Very
cool.
Get,
like gingerbready effect from that.
Yeah. Well, these have all been phenomenal. I will say I think I'm partial to both the Gold and the PX. Those are really unique. I'm curious though, as we wrap up,
Yeah.
what is coming up from Cotton and Reed? Are there any things that you have done that you're waiting on, or squirreled away a barrel secretly somewhere, or that you want to do that you haven't been able to yet?
Yes, it is a big year for us because we have just last month taken possession of the facility that was previously operated by Bow and Ivy Distillers, just a mile and a quarter up the road from us in Ivy City. So they unfortunately closed down, and we took over the lease over there. So it is a facility that's about 4 times the size of ours, which means there is room to store much more than 90 barrels. So we are excited to cut loose a little bit on the barrel aging front, because we've had to be very, very disciplined to date. I don't know, that's one word you could use for it. We have not been able to put down as many barrels as over the years we would have liked to, which is a double-edged sword. We would have more barrel-aged stuff out now. However, it's a tricky balance for a lot of small businesses. If you're like, well, in 3 years, our demand's going to be through the roof, obviously, so we got to tie up a ton of money in barrels. Sometimes the demand doesn't come together, and now you're
Right.
You're carrying that cost for a long time. So through no great genius, we avoided that pitfall by just having too small of a place. So consider that, up and coming distillers. So anyway, now we can go make that mistake. And we bought most of their production equipment as well. So we're very excited to try that out. They've got a big 3,000 liter Cota still that we can run either as a pot. We've never had a true pot still because we have this hybrid where we can turn off the plates, but we cannot bypass them.
Right.
So we'll be able to produce some heavier distillate up there, as well as some lighter distillate, because we can also run through their column, which hits a higher proof than ours comfortably does. They had been doing some vodka up there as well. So we're going to have a lot more flexibility on the distillation front as well between this facility and that one, all the space for barrels and whatnot. So I could guess at what we're going to do with that, but I am sure once we actually start doing it, I will turn out to be wrong, whatever I say right now. But so we're excited to learn what comes of it, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a fun challenge, but we're doing a bit of renovation up there, and yeah, very, very full plates around here this year.
Well, that's cool. I'm excited to see what comes of that. Any product that you're like itching to, like, I want to do this now that we have the space and the resources and the time?
Let me see. I am very excited to start doing some true pot still stuff.
Yeah, just different still.
And yeah, and we're gonna have a very different setup up there for fermentation as well. So getting into some longer ferments as well is a goal. So combining that with the pot still capability is going to be pretty exciting for us, because that's where you get into some of the funkier rums that get rum nerds out of bed in the morning. So we're excited to mess around with that.
I know it's big in whiskey, open versus closed fermentation. Is that a thing with sugarcane derivative? Does that matter much for the yeast back and forth?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see the full gamut in the rum world, from very buttoned up, closed, sterilized steel fermenters through ancient crumbling wood vats with no lid, and everything in between. So here we go very sterilized and steel cleaned up. We're probably not looking at open top fermentation over there. On our scale, we have enough challenges trying to maintain consistency. So
right.
Then opening up that can of worms, yeah.
A lot of variables.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And just out of my own curiosity, I love what you're doing. I love that you are showcasing the history and really educating about rum. Is there any desire down the road to branch off and do it like a gin or a vodka or a whiskey?
We are thinking about it more than we ever have, for a couple reasons, with the unfortunate closures of our friends and neighbors District Made, just up the road from us, as well as Bow and Ivy, and both of them had been doing whiskeys, vodka, and gin. So there is just a lot less of that in DC now.
Yeah.
With the extra space and the extra equipment, it feels like there might be an opportunity there. And so we are very actively talking about that and thinking about it. So if we went down the whiskey route, we'd probably go in the single malt direction, because that's what we're more excited about personally. Where again, it feels like there's kind of opportunity and it fits our, I don't know, we do the misfit categories, I guess, vibe. So that would be hard if we start doing vodka. It'd be like, how do I?
You're right.
But at the same time, I could see the vodka making a lot of sense, because you can make vodka from any substrate, and with the big column that we're getting, relative to what we have now, doing some kind of a cane-based vodka could be a very natural extension, actually, as a much lighter version of our white rum, for example. So
an idea just popped in my head, and I expect royalties if you go through with it. I'm kidding.
Deal.
I'm a massive Isla Scotch. I love peated stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard or seen anything peated, either peated aged or peated rum. I wonder if there's room to put rum down in an Isla cask. That might be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I just thought of it.
I want to drink it. So, sold. Yeah, there's definitely something to it. What is Vitae Spirits in Charlottesville, Virginia. Have you been there?
I've not been there. I know them. But yeah.
They make some really great rums, and they have their gold rum. They work with a barbecue joint that's down the road from them to, I forget, grill or maybe smoke fresh sugarcane stalks, and then they soak their rum in those, and they get this smokiness and grassy vegetal stuff from the cane stalks, and it's super distinctive. I don't know. I have not had something like that before. Yeah. So anyway, that's one that comes to mind as a recommendation if you're looking for a smoky rum thing before I can, get an Isla cask and age stuff in it for years.
You're right.
You should check them out.
Okay, that's a good recommendation. I just popped in my head. I'm kind of curious because I know the smoky world is starting to come back. Yeah. Into at least the whiskey fold. So
yeah. Oh, definitely.
I've had some smoky gins. I love mezcal. So I'm sure rum is. I mean, you are at the forefront of this distillate and doing the weird things and experimentations. I know it's part of the best part of your job.
Yeah.
So,
a ton of fun.
I appreciate your kinship in the spirit world. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
I appreciate you, and I'll be
Likewise. Back. Excellent. Well, we'll see you at the new facility next time, maybe.
Yes, I'm curious to see it. So
cool.
Sure, good luck to that, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Cheers. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate a follow and share on social media, subscribe to our YouTube, and be sure to give us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Everything you see and hear is out of pocket for us, including travel. If you support our mission of showcasing the amazing stories behind these small businesses, do me a favor and head over to buymeacoffee.com/craftedconvos. Buy Me a Coffee is an awesome way to help creators like me with simple one-time donations or a monthly contribution. Every dime goes into giving these breweries, distilleries, and more some much-deserved limelight. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out. Cheers!